dare you do that in my classroom? You are in serious trouble.
He is my son.
Because he wrote that his father was a 4-star general. She saw his worn shoes, his modest address, and his brown skin, and decided the truth was impossible. Welcome back, my beautiful family. Before we begin, please click subscribe, like this video, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more thrilling stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's get into the story. The fluorescent lights of Riverside Elementary's 4th grade classroom buzzed overhead, casting their sterile glow across rows of wooden desks. Lucas Hughes sat in the 3rd row from the back, his pencil moving carefully across the lined paper in front of him. The assignment was simple enough: write about what your parents do for work and why it makes you proud. Around him, other students scratched away with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Some wrote quickly, their words flowing with the ease of children who'd heard their parents' job titles repeated at dinner tables and neighborhood gatherings. Others chewed their pencil erasers, staring at the ceiling as if the answers might be written there in invisible ink. Lucas didn't hesitate. He knew exactly what to write. His father was a 4-star general in the United States Army, currently stationed overseas coordinating multinational defense operations. His mother worked as a nurse at County Memorial Hospital, often pulling double shifts to care for patients who had no one else. Both of his parents had taught him that service, whether to country or community, was the highest calling a person could answer. He wrote carefully, his handwriting neat despite the slight tremble in his fingers that came from excitement rather than nervousness. This was his chance to share something incredible about his family, something that made his chest swell with pride every time he thought about it. "Time's up, class," Mrs. Whitmore announced from the front of the room, clapping her hands twice in sharp succession. She was a woman in her early 50s, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and reading glasses that hung from a beaded chain around her neck. She'd been teaching at Riverside Elementary for 23 years, and her reputation preceded her: strict, no-nonsense, and utterly convinced that her experience had taught her everything she needed to know about her students before they ever opened their mouths. "Pass your papers forward," she instructed, her voice carrying the tone of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. The sound of shuffling papers filled the room as assignments made their way from back to front, hand to hand, until they reached the students in the 1st row. Those students stood and delivered the stacks to Mrs. Whitmore's desk, where she gathered them into a neat pile. Lucas watched as his paper disappeared into the collection, feeling a flutter of anticipation in his stomach. He wondered what Mrs. Whitmore would think when she read about his father. Would she share it with the class? Would she put it on the bulletin board like she sometimes did with exceptional work? "While I review these," Mrs. Whitmore said, settling into her chair and reaching for her red pen, "I want you all to take out your math workbooks and complete problems 15 through 30 on page 47. Quietly. The classroom filled with the sound of backpacks unzipping and workbooks being retrieved. Lucas found his math book and opened it to the correct page, but he couldn't quite focus on the fractions staring up at him. His mind kept drifting back to his assignment, to the pride he'd felt writing those words: "My father is a 4-star general." He remembered the last time he'd seen his dad in person, 3 months ago during a brief leave. His father had arrived at their apartment still in uniform, and Lucas had rushed into his arms, breathing in the familiar scent of military-issue soap and the faint smell of jet fuel that seemed to cling to his father no matter how much time had passed since his last flight. They'd spent that weekend together as a family, just Lucas, his mother, and his father, visiting the park, eating his mother's famous fried chicken, and staying up late watching old movies. His father had told him stories about the places he'd been, the people he'd met, the responsibility he carried. And he'd reminded Lucas of something important: your circumstances don't define your worth, son. Your character does. Your choices do. Never let anyone make you small because of where you live or what you look like. Lucas hadn't fully understood what his father meant at the time, but the words had stuck with him anyway, settling into some deep place in his heart where important truths lived. At the front of the room, Mrs. Whitmore worked through the stack of assignments with mechanical efficiency. Her red pen moved across the pages, a check mark here, a correction there, an occasional comment in the margins. Most of the papers received a cursory glance, a quick grade, and then were placed in the completed pile on the left side of her desk. Then she reached Lucas's paper. Her eyes scanned the first few lines, and her expression changed. The neutral, professional mask she wore slipped, replaced by something that looked like disbelief mixed with irritation. Her jaw tightened. She read the paper again, more slowly this time, and then she looked up, her gaze sweeping the classroom until it landed on Lucas. "Lucas Hughes," she called out, her voice cutting through the quiet scratch of pencils on paper. "Come to the front of the room, please." Lucas's head snapped up from his math workbook. His heart stuttered in his chest. There was something in Mrs. Whitmore's tone, something sharp and cold, that made his stomach drop. "Now, Lucas," she added when he didn't immediately move. He stood, his legs feeling unsteady beneath him, and made his way to the front of the classroom. Every eye in the room followed him. His classmates had stopped working on their math problems, their attention now fixed on whatever was about to unfold. Mrs. Whitmore held up Lucas's paper, gripping it between her thumb and forefinger as if it were contaminated. "Would you like to explain this to the class?" she asked, her tone dripping with skepticism. Lucas's mouth went dry. "Ma'am. This fantasy you've written," she continued, waving the paper slightly. "About your father being a 4-star general. Did you really think I wouldn't notice how implausible this is?" The word hit Lucas like a slap. Implausible. As if his father's rank, his father's service, his father's entire existence was something unbelievable. Something impossible. "It's not a fantasy," Lucas said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "My dad really is a general." Mrs. Whitmore's expression hardened. She stood from her chair, towering over Lucas with the full weight of her authority. "Lucas, I've been teaching for over 20 years. I know when a child is telling stories to make themselves seem more important than they are." "I'm not telling stories," Lucas insisted, his voice gaining a bit more strength even as his hands began to tremble at his sides. "My dad is General Vincent Hughes. He's stationed overseas right now, but—" "Enough." Mrs. Whitmore cut him off with a sharp gesture. She looked out at the class, and Lucas followed her gaze, seeing his classmates staring at him with expressions ranging from confusion to pity to barely concealed amusement. "Class," Mrs. Whitmore began, her voice taking on the pedagogical tone she used when she wanted to turn a moment into a lesson, "this is a perfect example of why honesty and humility are so important. Lucas here has written that his father is a 4-star general, one of the highest ranks in the military, a position held by only a handful of people in the entire country." She paused for effect, letting the words sink in. "But let's think about this logically. Lucas lives in the Riverside apartments. Those are subsidized housing units, are they not, Lucas?" Lucas's face burned with shame. He nodded, unable to find his voice. "And 4-star generals," Mrs. Whitmore continued, pacing slowly in front of the classroom like a lawyer delivering a closing argument, "live in military housing befitting their rank. They have security details. They have drivers. They certainly don't have their children attending regular public schools in neighborhoods like this one." Some of the students nodded along with her logic. It made sense to them, Lucas could see it in their faces. Why would a general's kid be here, in this school, wearing sneakers with holes in the toes and carrying a backpack held together with duct tape? "My mom wanted me to go to regular school," Lucas tried to explain, his voice cracking with emotion. "She said it was important to." "Lucas." Mrs. Whitmore's voice was ice. "I'm going to give you one chance to tell the truth and apologize to this class for wasting our time with this elaborate lie. What does your father really do?" The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade waiting to drop. Lucas felt tears prickling at the corners of his eyes, but he blinked them back furiously. His father's words echoed in his mind, "Never let anyone make you small." "He's a general," Lucas repeated, his voice steady despite the tremor running through his body. "I'm telling the truth." Mrs. Whitmore's face flushed red. In a motion so sudden it made several students gasp, she tore Lucas's assignment in half. Then she tore it again. And again. The sound of ripping paper filled the classroom as she reduced his carefully written words to confetti, letting the pieces flutter onto her desk like snow. That, she said coldly, is what I think of liars who try to make themselves important by inventing accomplishments they don't have. You will rewrite this assignment during recess, and this time, you will tell the truth about who your parents really are. Do you understand? Lucas stared at the torn pieces of his paper, each fragment containing a word or two from what he'd written. He could see part of the phrase, proud of my, on one piece, serves our country, on another. His vision blurred as tears finally spilled over, running hot down his cheeks. I said, do you understand? Mrs. Whitmore repeated, her voice rising. Yes, ma'am, Lucas whispered. You're dismissed. Go sit down. Lucas turned and walked back to his desk on legs that felt like they might give out at any moment. The walk felt impossibly long, every step taking him past classmates who wouldn't meet his eyes, who looked away as if his humiliation was contagious. He slid into his seat and stared down at his math workbook, but the numbers swam meaninglessly before his eyes. Behind him, he heard whispers starting to spread through the classroom like wildfire. Did you hear what he said? A 4-star general? Yeah, right. Why would he lie about something like that? My mom says people who live in those apartments are always trying to seem better than they are. Mrs. Whitmore made no effort to stop the whispers. She simply returned to her desk, made a note in her grade book, and continued reviewing the remaining assignments as if nothing significant had just occurred. But everything had changed for Lucas Hughes in that moment. Something had broken that couldn't easily be repaired, not his spirit, not yet, but his faith that the truth would always be enough. His father had taught him to stand tall, to be proud of who he was and where he came from. But no one had prepared him for what to do when people decided the truth was impossible before they ever gave him a chance to prove it. Lucas looked down at his worn sneakers, at the duct tape on his backpack hanging from his chair, at his hands that were smaller and browner than most of the other hands in this classroom. And for the first time in his young life, he understood what his father had been trying to warn him about. Some people would see him and decide who he was before he ever opened his mouth. Some people would look at where he lived, at the color of his skin, at the patches on his clothes, and conclude that certain truths were impossible for someone like him. Mrs. Whitmore was one of those people. And Lucas had just learned that sometimes, telling the truth wasn't enough. Sometimes, the truth needed proof. Sometimes, it needed vindication. What Lucas didn't know, what none of them knew, was that vindication was coming. And it would arrive with the roar of helicopter blades and the authority of 4 stars. The rest of the school day passed in a blur of humiliation for Lucas Hughes. Word of what had happened in Mrs. Whitmore's classroom spread through Riverside Elementary with the swift efficiency of wildfire. By lunchtime, it seemed every student in the building had heard some version of the story, usually embellished, always damaging. Did you hear about the kid who said his dad was a general? Yeah, and he lives in the Riverside apartments. My mom says those are for poor people. Why would someone lie about something so easy to check? Mrs. Whitmore tore up his paper right in front of everyone. She was so mad. Lucas sat alone at lunch, his tray of cafeteria food untouched in front of him. The chicken nuggets had gone cold, the green beans congealed into an unappetizing mass. His stomach was twisted into too many knots to even think about eating. Across the cafeteria, he could see groups of students glancing his way, whispering behind their hands, pointing when they thought he wasn't looking. He'd made a single attempt to defend himself earlier, when a 5th grader named Brandon had cornered him by the water fountain between classes. Hey, General's kid, Brandon had sneered, his voice loud enough to attract a small crowd. Where's your dad's army jeep? Or does a 4-star general take the bus like everybody else? The kids around them had laughed, and Lucas had felt his face burning with shame and anger. He'd opened his mouth to respond, to explain that his father was overseas, that he couldn't just come home whenever he wanted, that military service meant sacrifice, but the words had died in his throat when he saw the expressions on their faces. They'd already decided he was a liar. Nothing he said would change their minds. So he'd walked away, their laughter following him down the hallway like a pack of hunting dogs. Now, sitting alone in the cafeteria, Lucas pulled out his phone, a basic model his mother had given him for emergencies only. His fingers hovered over his mother's contact. He wanted to call her, to hear her voice, to have her tell him everything would be okay. But she was at the hospital, probably in the middle of her shift, caring for patients who needed her. He couldn't burden her with this. Not when she was already working so hard, already carrying so much. Instead, he scrolled to his father's contact. General Vincent Hughes. The last message in their thread was from 2 weeks ago, a short video his father had sent of the sunrise over whatever base he was stationed at, with a caption that read, "Thinking of you, son. Love you more than all the stars." Lucas's thumb hovered over the call button. His father had given him a special number, one that would connect even across time zones and secure military networks. But what would he say? That his teacher didn't believe him? That she'd humiliated him in front of the whole class? That kids were calling him a liar? His father would be furious. Lucas could already imagine the steel that would enter his voice, the way his jaw would set when he was angry. But his father was thousands of miles away, coordinating operations that kept people safe. Lucas couldn't distract him with elementary school drama. He put the phone away and forced himself to take a bite of cold chicken nugget. It tasted like cardboard and defeat. "Is this seat taken?" Lucas looked up to find Jasmine Walker standing next to his table, her lunch tray balanced in one hand. Jasmine was one of the few other black students in their grade, a quiet girl with elaborate braids and a quick smile. They'd never really talked much before. She ran with a different crowd, kids whose parents were doctors and lawyers and owned houses in the nicer part of town. "No," Lucas said quietly, gesturing to the empty seats around him. "It's all yours." Jasmine sat down across from him, arranging her food carefully on the table. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Lucas waited for her to say something about what had happened, to either mock him or worse, pity him. "My dad's a lawyer," Jasmine said finally, not looking at him as she opened her milk carton. "He works downtown at one of those big firms with the fancy offices. Sometimes when he picks me up from school, he's still wearing his court suit, and people stare. You know what some of the other parents have said to my mom?" Lucas shook his head. "They ask if he's her lawyer. Like the only reason a black man in a suit would be with a black woman and a black girl is if he's representing her for something. They can't imagine he's just her husband. My dad." Jasmine took a sip of her milk, her expression neutral but her eyes sharp. "People see what they expect to see. Not what's real." Lucas felt something crack open in his chest, not quite hope, but something close to it. Understanding, maybe. Solidarity. "She tore up my paper," he said quietly. "Right in front of everyone." "I know. I was there." Jasmine finally met his eyes. "For what it's worth, I believe you." "Why?" The question came out more desperately than Lucas intended. "Everyone else thinks I'm lying." Jasmine shrugged, spearing a piece of her salad with her fork. "Because I've seen how you carry yourself. My dad taught me that military families have a certain way about them, a kind of discipline and respect that's hard to fake. You have that. Plus," she added with a slight smile, "Mrs. Whitmore is wrong about a lot of things. Last year she told my mom that maybe I should focus more on practical skills instead of the advanced math class I wanted to take. Said some kids aren't naturally suited for higher academics." Lucas's eyes widened. "That's racist?" Jasmine finished for him. "Yeah. My mom filed a complaint with the principal, and I got into the advanced class anyway. Made straight A's all year." She paused, then added, "Mrs. Whitmore doesn't like being proven wrong. so she probably won't like what's about to happen to her. What do you mean? Before Jasmine could answer, the cafeteria doors swung open and Principal Hayes strode in, her heels clicking sharply against the linoleum floor. She scanned the room with quick efficiency until her gaze landed on Lucas. Her expression was tight, controlled, but Lucas could see something else underneath, concern, maybe, or worry. "Lucas Hughes," Principal Hayes called out, her voice cutting through the cafeteria noise. "Please come with me. And bring your things." The cafeteria fell silent. Every head turned toward Lucas, every eye fixed on him as he slowly stood from his seat. He could feel the weight of their stares, could practically hear their thoughts. What did he do now? Is he in more trouble? Maybe they're calling his fake general dad. Lucas grabbed his backpack and walked toward Principal Hayes, his sneakers squeaking slightly on the floor. As he passed tables of students, he heard the whispers starting up again, speculation building like a storm. Principal Hayes placed a gentle hand on his shoulder as he reached her. "It's all right, Lucas," she said quietly, her voice meant only for him. "You're not in trouble." They walked together out of the cafeteria and down the main hallway toward the administrative offices. Lucas had been to the principal's office only once before, at the beginning of the school year for a welcome meeting with all the new students. The building's main corridor was quiet now, most students still at lunch or in their classrooms. Their footsteps echoed off the lockers that lined the walls. "Lucas," Principal Hayes began as they walked, her tone careful, "I received a very interesting phone call about an hour ago." Lucas's heart started beating faster. "Ma'am?" It was from the Department of Defense. More specifically, from someone in the Pentagon who handles communications for senior military leadership. Principal Hayes paused, then continued, "They were inquiring about an incident involving one of our students, you, and wanted to verify some details about your enrollment here, your address, and your teacher assignments." Lucas felt his breath catch in his throat. "I told them everything was a matter of public record and that yes, you are enrolled here, and yes, Mrs. Whitmore is your homeroom teacher. Then they asked me a question that I'm now going to ask you." Principal Hayes stopped walking and turned to face Lucas directly, her expression serious. "Lucas, is your father really a 4-star general in the United States Army?" "Yes, ma'am," Lucas said, his voice steady despite the trembling in his hands. "General Vincent Hughes. He's overseas right now on deployment." Principal Hayes closed her eyes for a brief moment, and when she opened them again, Lucas saw something that looked like regret mixed with steel determination. "Then we have a serious problem, don't we?" They continued walking until they reached the principal's office. Inside, Principal Hayes gestured for Lucas to sit in one of the chairs opposite her desk, then settled into her own chair with a heavy sigh. She pulled up something on her computer, typed for a moment, then turned the screen so Lucas could see it. It was a Department of Defense webpage showing the current 4-star generals in the United States military. There were only about 40 of them across all branches of service. And there, fourth from the top in the Army section, was a photograph of Lucas's father in full dress uniform, his chest decorated with rows of ribbons and medals, for silver stars gleaming on his shoulders. "General Vincent T. Hughes," the caption read. "Current assignment, Commander, U.S. Army Europe and Africa." "That's your father," Principal Hayes said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am." Principal Hayes leaned back in her chair, removing her glasses and rubbing the bridge of her nose. "Lucas, I need you to tell me exactly what happened in Mrs. Whitmore's class this morning. Everything. Don't leave anything out." So Lucas told her. He recounted the assignment, what he'd written, Mrs. Whitmore's reaction. The accusations of lying, the public humiliation, the torn paper, the way she'd made him an example in front of the entire class. His voice remained steady through most of it, but it cracked when he described watching the pieces of his assignment flutter down like confetti. Principal Hayes listened without interrupting, her expression growing darker with each detail. When Lucas finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "I am so deeply sorry, Lucas," she said finally, and the sincerity in her voice was unmistakable. What happened to you this morning was unacceptable. You were humiliated based on assumptions about your background, your family's circumstances, and, though I hate to say it, almost certainly your race. That has no place in this school or any school. Lucas felt tears threatening again, but these were different from the ones he'd cried earlier. These were tears of validation, of finally being believed. The person I spoke with at the Pentagon informed me that your father has been made aware of the situation, Principal Hayes continued. Apparently, you're required to have a check-in call with him once a week, and when you missed yesterday's call, his office followed up with your mother to make sure everything was all right. She told them what had happened. Lucas's stomach dropped. His weekly call with his father. He'd completely forgotten about it in the aftermath of yesterday's humiliation. His mother must have been so worried when he came home from school, quiet and withdrawn. She'd asked him what was wrong, but he'd told her he was just tired. She'd seen right through it, mothers always did, and eventually, he'd broken down and told her everything. He should have known she'd tell his father. She always said they didn't keep secrets from each other, especially not about Lucas. Your father, Principal Hayes said, choosing her words carefully, is understandably upset. The Pentagon liaison informed me that General Hughes will be attending our Career Day event this Friday. He's cleared it with his superiors and arranged temporary leave specifically for this purpose. Lucas's eyes went wide. He's coming here. To the school. Yes. In 3 days. Principal Hayes folded her hands on her desk. Lucas, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Did you know your father was planning to come for Career Day? No, ma'am, Lucas said truthfully. I didn't even know we were having Career Day this week. Principal Hayes nodded slowly. Mrs. Whitmore organized it rather last minute. She sent out the announcements yesterday afternoon. It's this Friday, the day after tomorrow, actually. Parents and family members are invited to come speak to the students about their careers. The timing was almost poetic, Lucas thought. His father would walk into that classroom, into the very room where Mrs. Whitmore had called him a liar, and the truth would be impossible to deny. I want to be clear about something, Principal Hayes said, her voice taking on a firmer edge. What happened to you this morning was wrong, and there will be consequences for it. I will be having a very serious conversation with Mrs. Whitmore today. However, I also want to ensure that Friday's Career Day remains a positive, educational experience for all students. Can I trust you to handle your father's visit with maturity? Yes, ma'am, Lucas said. My dad always says that dignity and respect matter more than revenge. Principal Hayes smiled slightly. Your father sounds like a wise man. I'm looking forward to meeting him. She glanced at her computer screen again. The Pentagon liaison also informed me that General Hughes will be arriving with appropriate protocol for someone of his rank. That means there will likely be a security detail and some degree of fanfare. I wanted to prepare you for that. Lucas nodded, remembering the few times he'd seen his father in official capacities. The security, the formality, the way everyone around his father seemed to stand a little straighter, speak a little more carefully. Can I ask you something, Principal Hayes? Lucas said quietly. Of course. Why did Mrs. Whitmore think I was lying? I know we don't have a lot of money, and I know we live in the apartments, but why wasn't the truth even possible in her mind? Principal Hayes was quiet for a long moment, and Lucas could see her struggling with how to answer. Finally, she said, people carry biases, Lucas. Sometimes they're obvious, and sometimes they're subtle. Sometimes people don't even realize they have them. Mrs. Whitmore made assumptions based on circumstances and appearances rather than giving you the benefit of the doubt. That's a failure on her part, not a reflection of your truth or your worth. It was a careful answer, Lucas thought. A political answer. But underneath it, he heard what Principal Hayes wasn't quite saying, that Mrs. Whitmore had seen a black boy from a poor neighborhood and decided that certain truths were impossible for someone like him. You can return to class now, Principal Hayes said, standing. I'll be speaking with Mrs. Whitmore shortly, and I want you to know that you have my full support. If anyone, student or staff, gives you any further trouble about this, you come directly to me. Understood? Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Lucas stood and headed for the door, but Principal Hayes called him back. Lucas. Your father raised a good young man. He should be very proud. Lucas smiled, really smiled, for the first time since this whole ordeal had begun. Thank you, ma'am. That means a lot. As he walked back toward his classroom, Lucas's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw a message from his father. Heard what happened, son. I'm so sorry you had to go through that. Hold your head high. The truth has a way of revealing itself. I'll see you Friday. I love you. Dad. Lucas typed back quickly, love you too, Dad. I can't wait to see you. He tucked his phone away and continued down the hallway, his steps a little lighter than they'd been all day. In 3 days, his father would walk into Mrs. Whitmore's classroom. In 3 days, everyone would see the truth. And Lucas was going to make sure he stood tall when it happened. Behind him, in the principal's office, Principal Hayes was picking up her phone and dialing Mrs. Whitmore's classroom extension. Her expression was grim. The reckoning was about to begin. Mrs. Whitmore's classroom phone rang at exactly 1:47 p.m., interrupting her geography lesson. She frowned at the disruption, holding up one finger to her students as she crossed to her desk and picked up the receiver. Mrs. Whitmore speaking, she said crisply. Rebecca, this is Principal Hayes. I need you to come to my office immediately. Mrs. Patterson will cover your class. The tone left no room for questions. Mrs. Whitmore felt a flutter of irritation. She was in the middle of teaching, but she maintained her composure. Of course. I'll be right there. She hung up and turned to her students, who were watching with barely concealed curiosity. Class, continue reading Chapter 7. Mrs. Patterson will be here momentarily to supervise. I expect complete silence and good behavior. As if on cue, Mrs. Patterson, the school's substitute teacher, appeared in the doorway. Mrs. Whitmore gathered her lesson planner and walked briskly down the hallway toward the administrative offices, her mind running through possible reasons for the summons. Perhaps Principal Hayes wanted to discuss the upcoming Career Day event. She'd worked hard to organize it on short notice. She knocked on the principal's door. Come in. Mrs. Whitmore entered to find Principal Hayes standing behind her desk rather than sitting, her posture rigid, her expression controlled but unmistakably angry. The computer screen was turned at an angle, displaying something Mrs. Whitmore couldn't quite see from the doorway. Close the door, please, Principal Hayes said. Mrs. Whitmore did so, a small kernel of unease beginning to form in her stomach. She'd worked with Principal Hayes for 5 years, and she'd never heard quite that tone in her voice before. Sit down, Rebecca. Mrs. Whitmore sat, folding her hands in her lap with the prim correctness of someone who'd spent decades in classrooms. Is there a problem? Tell me about Lucas Hughes, Principal Hayes said, still standing, her hands flat on her desk. The unease bloomed into something larger. Lucas? He's one of my students. Bright enough, but he has a tendency toward embellishment. In fact, just this morning I had to address a rather egregious lie he told in an assignment about his father being a 4-star general, Principal Hayes finished, her voice like ice. Yes. I'm aware. Mrs. Whitmore blinked. Then you understand why I had to correct him. The boy lives in subsidized housing, and he claimed. Rebecca. Principal Hayes turned her computer screen so Mrs. Whitmore could see it. Is this the man Lucas claimed was his father? Mrs. Whitmore found herself looking at an official Department of Defense webpage. Her eyes scanned the text, landing on a photograph of a black man in army dress uniform, his chest covered in medals and ribbons, 4 silver stars prominently displayed on his shoulders. General Vincent T. Hughes. The words seemed to blur and refocus as Mrs. Whitmore read them again. And again. That can't be, she started. It is. Principal Hayes's voice cut through her denial like a scalpel. I received a call from the Pentagon this afternoon. General Hughes's office contacted us to verify Lucas's enrollment after they learned what happened in your classroom. Lucas's father is exactly who the boy said he was. Mrs. Whitmore's mouth went dry. She stared at the screen, her mind racing to reconcile what she was seeing with what she'd assumed. The subsidized housing. The worn clothes. The quiet, modest demeanor. None of it fit her image of a general's family. But he lives in the Riverside apartments, she said weakly. How could a four-star general's son live in modest circumstances? Principal Hayes's tone was sharp now, cutting. Perhaps because his mother wanted him to have a normal childhood. Perhaps because military families make sacrifices that civilians can't always understand. Perhaps because a person's worth and their family's accomplishments aren't measured by their zip code or the condition of their shoes. Mrs. Whitmore felt her face flush hot. I didn't mean to, I was only trying to teach the children about honesty. Anne. You humiliated that child in front of his peers based on assumptions, Principal Hayes interrupted. You tore up his assignment. You called him a liar. You made him an example of dishonesty when he was telling the absolute truth. And why? Because you couldn't imagine that a black boy from a poor neighborhood could have a father with that rank and distinction? The words hung in the air between them, sharp and accusatory. That's not, I would never, Mrs. Whitmore stammered, but even as she spoke, she felt the truth of it settling in her stomach like a stone. She had made assumptions. She had seen Lucas's circumstances and decided his story was impossible before ever giving him a chance to prove it. General Hughes will be attending Career Day on Friday, Principal Hayes continued. He's arranged leave specifically to come to this school, to this classroom. And when he arrives, every student, every parent, and every staff member will see exactly what you refuse to believe. Mrs. Whitmore felt something crumble inside her. The enormity of what she'd done was beginning to sink in, and with it came a shame so profound she could barely breathe. What do I do? She whispered. Principal Hayes finally sat down, her expression softening slightly but her eyes still hard. You start by understanding that this isn't about you feeling bad. This is about a 10-year-old boy who trusted you with his truth and was publicly shamed for it. You will apologize to Lucas, and you will mean it. And then you will spend a very long time examining the biases that led you to treat him that way in the first place. Mrs. Whitmore nodded, tears beginning to blur her vision. I will. I promise, I will. Friday is going to be difficult for you, Principal Hayes said. But it's necessary. You need to face what you've done. And Rebecca? This is going on your permanent record. We'll discuss further consequences after Career Day. Mrs. Whitmore left the office 10 minutes later, her legs shaky, her mind reeling. As she walked back toward her classroom, she passed Lucas in the hallway. He looked at her, his young face carefully neutral, and she saw something in his eyes that made her chest ache, not anger, but a kind of quiet dignity that she hadn't earned and didn't deserve. She'd spent 23 years teaching children. And in one morning, she'd learned she didn't know them at all. The next 2 days crawled by with agonizing slowness. Wednesday and Thursday felt like years compressed into hours, each moment stretching and contracting in Lucas's awareness as he waited for Friday to arrive. Mrs. Whitmore had been different since her meeting with Principal Hayes. The sharp edges of her personality had dulled somehow, replaced by something softer and far more uncertain. She no longer called on Lucas in class, no longer met his eyes when she spoke to the room. It was as if she'd erected an invisible wall between them, built from shame and avoidance. On Wednesday afternoon, as students were packing up their belongings, Mrs. Whitmore had approached Lucas's desk. Her hands were clasped tightly in front of her, her knuckles white with tension. Lucas, she'd said quietly, her voice barely audible above the noise of zippers and shuffling papers. I owe you an apology. What I did on Monday was wrong. Deeply wrong. I made assumptions I had no right to make, and I humiliated you based on those assumptions. I'm sorry. Lucas had looked up at her, seeing the genuine distress in her eyes. Part of him wanted to accept the apology immediately, to make her feel better, to smooth over the awkwardness. But another part, the part that had spent 2 days being whispered about and stared at, wasn't quite ready to let her off the hook. Thank you, he'd said simply, offering nothing more. Mrs. Whitmore had nodded, seeming to understand that forgiveness wasn't something she could demand or expect on her timeline. She'd walked away, and Lucas had finished packing his bag. Now it was Thursday evening, and Lucas sat at the small kitchen table in their apartment, doing homework while his mother prepared dinner. The smell of seasoned chicken and rice filled their modest space, mixing with the sound of evening traffic from the street below. Your father called while you were at school, his mother said, stirring the pot on the stove. Claire Hughes was a woman of medium height with kind eyes and hands made strong from years of nursing work. She wore her scrubs even now, having just returned from her shift at the hospital. He wanted to make sure you were doing okay. Asked if you were nervous about tomorrow. I'm not nervous, Lucas said, though that wasn't entirely true. He was excited, vindicated, maybe a little anxious about how everything would unfold. I'm just ready for everyone to see the truth. His mother turned from the stove, studying him with that penetrating gaze that mothers seem to possess universally. Lucas, baby, I want you to remember something. Tomorrow isn't about revenge or making Mrs. Whitmore feel bad. It's about standing in your truth with dignity. Your father is coming because he loves you and wants to support you, not to humiliate anyone. I know, Mom, Lucas said. Dad already told me the same thing when we talked last night. Claire smiled. Good. Because the Hughes family doesn't operate from a place of cruelty. We operate from a place of principle. Your father has faced discrimination in his career more times than I can count. People who thought a black man couldn't possibly belong in leadership, who questioned his qualifications, who made him work twice as hard to prove himself. But he never let bitterness take root. He stayed focused on excellence and integrity. Lucas nodded, absorbing his mother's words. She came over and sat down next to him, taking his hand in hers. Tomorrow, when your father walks into that classroom, you're going to feel a lot of things. Pride, certainly. Maybe satisfaction. But I want you to also feel compassion, even for Mrs. Whitmore. She made a terrible mistake, but she's also going to learn from it. Growth often comes from our worst moments. What if she doesn't learn? Lucas asked. What if she just stays the same? Then that's her choice to make, Claire said gently. But you can't control other people's growth, baby. You can only control your own response. And the Hughes family always responds with grace. They ate dinner together, talking about everything and nothing, Lucas's upcoming math test, his mother's challenging cases at the hospital, the book Lucas was reading for English class. It felt normal and comfortable, a small pocket of peace before tomorrow's storm. That night, Lucas laid in bed staring at the ceiling of his small room. The apartment was quiet except for the distant sounds of the city, sirens, car horns, the muted conversations of neighbors through thin walls. He thought about his father, probably on a plane right now, crossing time zones and oceans to get here. He thought about Mrs. Whitmore and the look in her eyes when she'd apologized. He thought about Jasmine sitting with him at lunch, choosing solidarity over social safety. His phone buzzed with a text from his father, landing in 6 hours. Can't wait to see you, son. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's a big day. Lucas smiled in the darkness and typed back, I will, Dad. Love you. He closed his eyes, his mother's words echoing in his mind, grace. Dignity. Truth. Tomorrow, he would stand in all three. Friday morning arrived with crystal clear skies and unseasonable warmth. Lucas woke before his alarm, his heart already racing with anticipation. He could hear his mother moving around in the kitchen, the familiar sounds of coffee brewing and dishes clinking. When he emerged from his room, dressed in his best clothes, khaki pants and a button-down shirt his mother had ironed the night before, he found his father sitting at their small kitchen table. General Vincent Hughes stood as Lucas entered, and despite having seen him on video calls every week, the sight of his father in person took Lucas's breath away. His father was tall and broad-shouldered, his presence commanding even in civilian clothes. He wore a simple polo shirt and slacks now, but Lucas knew that in a few hours, he'd be in his full dress uniform. "There's my boy," his father said, his deep voice warm with affection. Lucas ran into his arms, and his father lifted him off the ground in a tight embrace. Lucas buried his face in his father's shoulder, breathing in that familiar scent, feeling the strength in those arms that had held him since he was born. "I missed you so much, Dad," Lucas said, his voice muffled. "I missed you too, son. Every single day." His father set him down but kept his hands on Lucas's shoulders, looking him over carefully. "You've grown. What has your mother been feeding you?" "Everything," Claire said from the kitchen, smiling as she poured coffee. "He's got your appetite." They sat together for breakfast, the three of them crowded around the small table like they'd done countless times before. Lucas's father asked about school, about his friends, about his favorite subjects. He didn't mention Monday's incident, didn't bring up Mrs. Whitmore or the humiliation. Instead, he focused entirely on Lucas, making him feel seen and valued in a way that had nothing to do with vindication or proving anyone wrong. "Your mother tells me you've been handling this situation with real maturity," his father said as they finished eating. "I'm proud of you for that, Lucas. It would have been easy to lash out or become bitter. But you kept your dignity." "Mom reminded me about Grace," Lucas said. His father smiled, reaching across the table to squeeze Claire's hand. "Your mother is the wisest person I know. Listen to her always." At 8:30, Lucas's father excused himself to the bedroom to change into his uniform. Lucas waited in the living room, his mother beside him on their worn couch. "You ready for this?" she asked quietly. "I think so," Lucas said. "Is it okay that I'm excited?" Claire laughed softly. "Baby, it's absolutely okay. You've earned this moment. Just remember what we talked about, dignity and grace, even in victory." When his father emerged from the bedroom, Lucas's breath caught. General Vincent Hughes stood before them in his Army service uniform, the dark blue jacket adorned with ribbons and medals that represented decades of service and sacrifice. On each shoulder gleamed 4 silver stars, catching the morning light streaming through their apartment windows. The Combat Infantry badge sat above his ribbons, along with the Ranger tab and Special Forces tab that spoke to his elite training. He wore his peaked cap at a precise angle, every detail of his appearance regulation perfect. He looked like what he was, one of the most senior military officers in the United States Army. "How do I look?" he asked, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Like a general," Lucas said, his voice filled with awe and pride. "That's because I am one," his father replied. He checked his watch. "Career day starts at 10. We should leave by 9:15 to account for security protocols. The detail is waiting downstairs." "Security detail?" Lucas asked. His father's smile widened slightly. "Son, 4-star generals don't travel alone. There are procedures. Protocols. Your classmates are about to get a lesson in what military leadership actually looks like." Lucas's mother stood, smoothing down her own professional outfit. She'd taken the morning off from the hospital to attend. "Then let's not keep them waiting," she said. "It's time to go teach some people about assumptions." They gathered their things and headed for the door. As they descended the stairs of the Riverside apartments, Lucas could see what his father meant about security. 2 black SUVs were parked outside, and 4 men in dark suits stood at attention. When his father emerged, they straightened even further, respect evident in every line of their bearing. "Ready, sir?" one of them asked. "Ready," General Hughes confirmed. He looked down at Lucas. Let's go show them the truth, son. The convoy of black SUVs pulled into the parking lot of Riverside Elementary at exactly 9:50 a.m., 10 minutes before career day was scheduled to begin. Lucas sat in the back seat of the lead vehicle between his mother and father, watching as the school building came into view. Students and parents were already arriving, streaming through the main entrance in clusters. Lucas could see some of them pause and stare as the official vehicles rolled to a stop in the visitor parking area. "Sir, we'll need a few minutes to establish a perimeter," one of the security agents said from the front seat. "Understood," General Hughes replied. "Take your time. We do this properly." Lucas watched through the tinted windows as the security detail exited the vehicles and began coordinating with each other via discreet earpieces. Two of them entered the school building, presumably to coordinate with Principal Hayes. The others positioned themselves at strategic points around the entrance. Inside the school, Mrs. Whitmore stood in her classroom, greeting arriving parents with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She'd barely slept the past 2 nights, her mind replaying Monday's incident over and over like a horror film she couldn't stop watching. The other parents chatted easily, discussing their careers and what they planned to share with the students. There was Mr. Chen, an architect who'd brought blueprints and building models. Mrs. Rodriguez, a veterinarian with pictures of animals she treated. Mr. Johnson, a firefighter still in his uniform. They were excited, energetic, ready to inspire the children. Mrs. Whitmore felt like she was waiting for an execution. Principal Hayes appeared in the doorway, her expression carefully neutral. "Rebecca, may I see you in the hallway for a moment?" Mrs. Whitmore excused herself and stepped into the corridor. Principal Hayes's face was serious but not unkind. "He's here," she said simply. "General Hughes just arrived. He'll be coming to your classroom in about 5 minutes. I wanted to give you a heads up." Mrs. Whitmore's stomach clenched. "Is he angry?" "He's professional," Principal Hayes replied. "But Rebecca, I won't lie to you, this is going to be uncomfortable. My advice? Stand tall, acknowledge what happened, and let him have his moment with his son. This isn't about you." Mrs. Whitmore nodded, her throat tight. "Thank you for the warning." She returned to the classroom, her hands trembling slightly as she arranged papers on her desk. The students were filing in now, taking their seats, chattering excitedly about the various parents and their professions. Lucas wasn't among them yet. At 9:58, Principal Hayes's voice came over the PA system. "Teachers and students, we have a very special guest joining us for Career Day this morning. Please welcome him with the respect and courtesy he deserves." Mrs. Whitmore felt every muscle in her body tense. In the hallway outside, Lucas walked between his parents, his father's hand resting gently on his shoulder. The security detail flanked them at a respectful distance. Students and teachers stopped to stare as they passed, mouths falling open at the sight of the 4-star general striding through their school. "Is that really a general?" one student whispered. "Look at all those medals," another breathed. They reached Mrs. Whitmore's classroom. Through the small window in the door, Lucas could see his classmates already seated, the visiting parents standing at the front. Mrs. Whitmore stood near her desk, her face pale, her posture rigid. "You okay, son?" his father asked quietly. Lucas looked up at him and nodded. "I'm ready, Dad." General Hughes smiled and straightened his uniform. "Then let's do this with class." He opened the door. The effect was instantaneous. Every conversation in the room stopped mid-sentence. Every head turned toward the doorway. Students' eyes went wide. Parents straightened unconsciously, some of them visibly recognizing the significance of those 4 stars. And Mrs. Whitmore's face went absolutely white. General Vincent Hughes stepped into the classroom, his presence commanding immediate attention. He removed his cap and tucked it under his arm with practiced precision. His eyes swept the room, taking in everything, the students, the parents, the decorations on the walls, before finally landing on Mrs. Whitmore. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm and authoritative. "I'm General Vincent Hughes, United States Army. I believe you know my son, Lucas." Lucas stepped in beside his father, standing tall, his head held high. Around the classroom, he could see his classmates' faces transforming, shock giving way to realization, realization giving way to dawning comprehension. He'd been telling the truth all along. And now everyone knew it. The silence in the classroom stretched for what felt like an eternity. Then, as if someone had flipped a switch, chaos erupted, not loud chaos, but the whispered, urgent kind that ripples through a room like wildfire. "That's really his dad. Oh my God, he was telling the truth. A 4-star general. A real one. I can't believe we didn't believe him." Mrs. Whitmore stood frozen near her desk, her face cycling through shades of red and white. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, seemingly unable to form words. Principal Hayes entered behind the Hughes family, her presence adding an official weight to the moment. "Class, please stand and show proper respect for General Hughes." The students scrambled to their feet, chairs scraping against linoleum. The visiting parents were already standing, several of them instinctively straightening their postures in the presence of such high military rank. Mr. Johnson, the firefighter, actually saluted before catching himself and lowering his hand. General Hughes acknowledged them with a slight nod. "Please, everyone, be seated. I'm not here for ceremony. I'm here as a father." As the room settled, he walked slowly toward the front, Lucas beside him, Claire following gracefully behind. General Hughes's eyes never left Mrs. Whitmore, and Lucas watched his teacher visibly shrink under that steady gaze. "Mrs. Whitmore," General Hughes said, his tone conversational but carrying an undercurrent of steel. "I understand you've been teaching my son this year." "Why yes, sir," Mrs. Whitmore stammered. "General Hughes, I need to apologize. What I did to Lucas on Monday was inexcusable. I made terrible assumptions based on." General Hughes held up one hand, and she fell silent immediately. "Before you continue," he said, "I'd like to share something with this class, if you don't mind." He turned to face the students, his bearing relaxed but authoritative. "How many of you thought Lucas was lying when he said I was a general?" Slowly, hesitantly, hands began to rise. One, then another, until more than half the class had their hands in the air. Lucas saw Brandon, the 5th grader who'd mocked him by the water fountain, raise his hand shamefacedly. He saw the kids who'd whispered about him at lunch, who'd laughed when Mrs. Whitmore tore his paper. Only Jasmine kept her hand down, meeting Lucas's eyes with a small, supportive smile. "Thank you for your honesty," General Hughes said. "Now, can anyone tell me why you didn't believe him?" A long pause. Finally, a girl named Ashley spoke up, her voice small. Because Lucas lives in the apartments. And his clothes are kind of old. And we thought General's kids would go to private schools and have fancy stuff." "I see," General Hughes said, nodding slowly. "So you judged the truth of his words based on his appearance and his address. Is that accurate?" The students nodded, many of them looking down at their desks, shame coloring their faces. General Hughes walked to the center of the room, commanding attention effortlessly. "Let me tell you something about service, about real leadership, and about what matters in this world. My wife and I chose to live modestly. We chose to send Lucas to public school. We chose to teach him that character matters more than comfort, that integrity matters more than image." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I've commanded thousands of troops across multiple continents. I've made decisions that affected national security and international relations. And you know what I learned? The most dangerous mistakes we make are the ones based on assumptions. Assuming we know someone's story because of how they look. Assuming someone's truth is impossible because it doesn't match our expectations." Mrs. Whitmore had tears streaming down her face now, silent and unashamed. General Hughes turned back to her. "Mrs. Whitmore, you humiliated my son in front of his peers. You tore up his work. You called him a liar. And why? Because a black boy from a modest neighborhood couldn't possibly have the father he claimed to have. Yes, Mrs. Whitmore whispered, her voice breaking. Yes, sir. That's exactly what I did, and I am so deeply, profoundly sorry. To Lucas, to you, to Mrs. Hughes, and to every student in this classroom who watched me demonstrate the exact opposite of what a teacher should be. The classroom was silent now, everyone transfixed by the rawness of the moment. General Hughes looked at his son. Lucas, this is your moment. What would you like to say? Lucas stood in the center of the classroom, aware of every eye on him. His father's hand rested gently on his shoulder, a steady presence offering strength without pressure. His mother stood nearby, her expression proud and encouraging. This was his moment. The moment when he could make Mrs. Whitmore feel as small as she'd made him feel. The moment when he could let his classmates know exactly how much their whispers and laughter had hurt. The moment for revenge. But as Lucas looked around the room, at Mrs. Whitmore's tear-stained face, at his classmates' expressions of shame and regret, at the parents who were witnessing a lesson far more valuable than any career presentation, he remembered his mother's words about grace. Mrs. Whitmore, Lucas began, his voice quiet but clear, what you did hurt me. A lot. You made me feel like my truth didn't matter, like who I am and where I come from meant I couldn't possibly have something to be proud of. Mrs. Whitmore nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. I know. I'm so sorry, Lucas. But, Lucas continued, my dad taught me that people make mistakes. Even big ones. And my mom taught me that how we respond to hurt says more about us than the hurt itself. He took a deep breath. I forgive you, Mrs. Whitmore. I hope you learn from this. I hope we all do. The classroom remained silent, but it was a different kind of silence now, not uncomfortable, but reverent. Lucas saw several of his classmates wiping at their eyes. Even some of the parents looked moved. Mrs. Whitmore walked toward Lucas, then knelt down so she was at his eye level. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. You've shown more grace and maturity than I did. I promise you, I will spend the rest of my career making sure I never judge another student the way I judged you. You have my word. She stood and addressed the entire class. Students, parents, I want you all to witness this moment. This is what real character looks like. Lucas had every right to be angry, to want revenge, to make me feel as terrible as I made him feel. Instead, he chose forgiveness. That's the lesson I should have been teaching all along. General Hughes stepped forward, his expression softening for the first time since entering the classroom. Mrs. Whitmore, accountability and growth are what separate good people from perfect people. None of us are perfect. But when we acknowledge our mistakes and commit to change, that's when real transformation happens. He turned to address the entire room. I came here today prepared to be very angry. Prepared to demand consequences and make sure everyone knew what had happened to my son. But Lucas just taught me something too, that sometimes the most powerful response to injustice isn't fury, it's grace. My son is 10 years old, and he just demonstrated more wisdom than most adults ever achieve. Principal Hayes stepped forward, clearing her throat. General Hughes, Mrs. Hughes, Lucas, thank you for handling this situation with such dignity. And I want everyone here to know that this incident has prompted some important conversations at the administrative level. We'll be implementing mandatory implicit bias training for all staff, creating new protocols for how we address student claims, and establishing a student council focused on equity and respect. She looked directly at Mrs. Whitmore. Rebecca, you'll be heading that training program. Sometimes the best teachers are those who've learned the hardest lessons. Mrs. Whitmore nodded, acceptance and determination in her eyes. I'd be honored. What would you do if you were in Lucas's position? Would you have chosen forgiveness, or would you have wanted the person who hurt you to face harsher consequences? Leave a comment below, we'd love to hear your thoughts. General Hughes checked his watch. Now, I believe we have a career day to continue. I'd love to tell these students about what it means to serve in the military, about leadership, and about the real responsibilities that come with these stars. He gestured to his shoulders. If there's time, that is. There's absolutely time, sir, Principal Hayes said with a smile. The floor is yours. As General Hughes began to speak about his career, his service, and the values that guided him, Lucas returned to his seat. Jasmine gave him a thumbs up from across the room. Other classmates smiled at him with genuine warmth, their earlier mockery replaced by respect and even admiration. For the first time all week, Lucas felt like he could breathe freely. The truth had won. But more importantly, grace had won too. 3 months later, Riverside Elementary looked different, not physically, but in the invisible ways that matter most. The changes that began with Lucas Hughes and his father's visit had rippled outward, touching every corner of the school community. Mrs. Whitmore stood at the front of the auditorium, addressing a room full of teachers from across the district. This was her third implicit bias training session, and each time she told the story of what had happened with Lucas, it became both easier and harder, easier because the words flowed more naturally now, harder because the shame never fully disappeared. I was so certain I was right, she told the assembled educators. I looked at Lucas's circumstances and decided his truth was impossible. I didn't see a student. I saw my assumptions. And in doing so, I failed at the most fundamental responsibility we have as teachers, to believe in our students and honor their truths. The teachers listened intently, many taking notes. Some nodded in recognition, perhaps seeing their own unconscious biases reflected in her story. After the session, a young black teacher approached her. "Thank you for sharing that," she said quietly. "I've had teachers like you. Teachers who looked at me and decided what I was capable of before I ever opened my mouth. It takes courage to admit what you did and to change." Mrs. Whitmore felt the familiar sting of tears but blinked them back. "I just wish I'd learned this lesson without hurting a child in the process." "But you did learn it," the young teacher replied. "And now you're making sure others learn it too. That matters." Down the hallway, in Mrs. Whitmore's classroom, Lucas sat at the head table of the newly formed Student Equity Council. He'd been elected president by his peers, a position that still sometimes felt surreal to him. Around the table sat Jasmine, who served as vice president, and 8 other students from various grades. "Our next initiative," Jasmine was saying, reading from her notes, "is the Know My Story project. Every student who wants to participate will create a presentation about their family, their background, and something about themselves that others might not know. The goal is to break down assumptions before they can take root." "I love that," said Marcus, a 6th grader whose parents were immigrants from Nigeria. "Too many people assume things about me because of my accent. This gives us a chance to control our own narratives." Lucas nodded, making notes in his own notebook, a new one his father had sent him, embossed with the words, "Truth and Dignity," on the cover. "Let's present it to Principal Hayes next week. I think she'll support it." After the meeting, Lucas walked home alone, taking the familiar route through his neighborhood. The Riverside apartments looked the same as always, modest, worn in places, but full of life and community. He used to see it through others' eyes, as evidence of limitation. Now he saw it as his father had taught him to see it, as home, as a place that had shaped him into someone who valued character over appearances. His phone buzzed with a video call. His father's face appeared on the screen, calling from somewhere overseas where it was already evening. "Hey, son. How was the council meeting?" "Really good, Dad. We're launching a new project." Lucas explained the Know My Story initiative as he climbed the stairs to his family's apartment. His father's face glowed with pride. "That's outstanding, Lucas. You're not just standing up for yourself anymore, you're changing the whole culture. That's real leadership." "I learned from the best," Lucas said, smiling. "You learned from your own heart, son. I'm just grateful I get to witness it." His father paused, his expression becoming more serious. "Lucas, I want you to remember something. What happened with Mrs. Whitmore, that was hard. Painful. Unfair. But you chose to turn that pain into purpose. You chose grace over bitterness. That's the kind of strength that changes the world." Lucas reached his apartment door, key in hand. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Always. Have you ever regretted the choices you and Mom made? About where we live, about my school, about everything?" His father's expression softened. "Not for a single second, Lucas. You're growing up grounded, humble, and aware. You're learning that worth isn't measured in possessions or addresses. Those are lessons that will serve you better than any private school ever could. Your mother and I are prouder of you than you'll ever know." Inside the apartment, Lucas found his mother preparing dinner, still in her scrubs from the hospital. She looked tired but smiled when she saw him. "How was your day, baby?" "Really good, Mom," Lucas said, setting down his backpack. "Really, really good." That evening, after homework and dinner and the comfortable routines of family life, Lucas sat at the small desk in his room and pulled out his journal, something his counselor had suggested after the incident with Mrs. Whitmore. He'd been writing in it regularly, processing his feelings, documenting his journey. He wrote, "Today I realized something. What happened with Mrs. Whitmore was terrible, but it also gave me a purpose. It showed me that assumptions and biases hurt people every day, and that speaking truth, even when it's hard, even when people don't believe you, matters." Dad says leadership isn't about rank or position. It's about character and courage. I think I'm finally understanding what he means. He closed the journal and looked at the photograph on his desk, the one taken on career day, showing him standing between his parents, his father in full uniform, all three of them smiling. Someone had captured it and it had gone viral, becoming a symbol of resilience and truth. But for Lucas, it was simply a reminder of who he was, the son of a general and a nurse, a student at Riverside Elementary, a kid from the apartments who'd stood up for truth and chosen grace over revenge. 4 months ago, his teacher had torn up his assignment and called him a liar. Today, he was changing his school's culture and showing others what it meant to lead with integrity. His father had been right, circumstances don't define worth. Character does. Choices do. And Lucas Hughes was choosing to make his truth matter, not just for himself, but for everyone who'd ever been judged by their appearance, their address, or the color of their skin. The boy who'd been humiliated for telling the truth had become a leader who made sure truth, respect, and fairness weren't just words, but the foundation of how his school community treated one another. And that, Lucas thought as he turned off his light and settled into bed, was a story worth telling. A story that began with pain but ended with purpose. A story that proved the truth always finds a way to shine, especially when carried by someone brave enough to stand in it, no matter who refuses to believe.
Wow, thank you so much for watching. Seriously, your support means the world to me. If you enjoyed this video, the biggest way you can show me love and encourage me to keep creating is to hit that like button and subscribe. Takes 1 second, but it makes a huge difference. Speaking of more videos, I've got another exciting one lined up for you. Just click on the next video showing right on your screen now to keep the fun going. See you there.